My name's Andrew Bridgen. Until 4 weeks ago, I was the independent member of Parliament for North West Leicestershire, just up the road. I was never meant to be a politician. I want to share with you how I got into politics. I was running my own business. It was a £1,000 startup in 1988, and I built it up to a 30 million turnover business. I was making lots of money. I was debt-free. I built a new factory in North West Leicestershire, investing 10 million, paid the bank off. Everything was looking good. And I used to have lots of friends who were small and medium-sized businesses. I was chair of the Institute of Directors for the East Midlands. And on a Friday night, everyone used to moan about the state of the country. And I got racked off with it. Every Friday night, all my friends were moaning, the country's going down the tubes, North West Leicestershire's terrible. It had been controlled at the council level by Labour since it was formed in 1983. And it must have been one pint of Marston's pedigree too many, and I lost it. And I said, look, every Friday we're here, we're moaning. There's no one else going to do anything, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So I said, if you stand for the council, and you stand, 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 we'll take over the council. I'll stand for MP. We'll take over, and we'll get it sorted. And to a man and a woman of them, they all said yes. So we went straight into the Conservative Association in North West Leicestershire. I think they had about 55 members, hadn't put a leaflet out for about 10 years. It was a Labour-held seat, and we basically took over. I went and passed the exams to become a candidate for the Conservative Party. Believe it or not, there are exams to become a Conservative candidate. God knows like what the ones who didn't pass the exams must be like. In 2007 was the local council elections in North West Leicestershire, all-out elections, and we had put the leaflets out. I'd paid for them, and we took Labour down to 5 councillors out of 38 in one night, took control of the council with the biggest swing against Labour in the country in those elections. David Cameron came to my prospective seat, because I was only a candidate at the 2010 elections. We didn't know when the elections were going to be. And despite the fact that we'd just had the biggest swing in the country against the Labour Party and taken control of the council with a landslide, David Cameron said that basically I wasn't in his club, I wasn't an A-lister. He said that in front of constituents, he said that North West Leicestershire was a dump and that he'd never vote Conservative, and he wasn't going to give me any money for my campaign. I told him that I didn't need his money, I got my own money. I told him I would win, and I told him that if that's your view, David, and he was only leader of the opposition at the time, I said, it's best that you never come here ever again. And he is a man of his word sometimes, because he never came to my constituency ever again. And in the 2010 election, I was gutted, because I only had the second biggest swing against Labour in the country. I was beaten by Cannock Chase, but we had a 12.5% swing, and I turned 4,500 Labour into 7,500 Conservative. But I did it all with my own money, without the help of the Central Party. So they didn't want me to be an MP. And amazingly, within weeks of being elected, I was approached by Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin, who are now quite famous, for those of you who followed the Post Office Horizon scandal. Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin came to one of my very first surgeries. I thought there were two broken people who looked about 30 years older than me. They were about 10 years older than me, but they were completely haggard from their experience. They were convicted criminals. They'd been done for fraud. And they came to me with an outrageous story of a government cover-up, the fact that they were fitted up for a crime they didn't commit by a big institution, a big corporation. And it was unbelievable. And I thought, I'm a new MP. Why are these people coming to me? It's clearly something seriously painful raking up their experience, which has destroyed them. Why would they be coming to me if it wasn't true? Because there's nothing in it for them. They're both convicted of crimes. And I couldn't help but think that these people had been pillars of society in Ibstock, and I knew the village of Ibstock. They kept the post office for a very long time. blemishless record, and now they were criminals. And their story was so outrageous that I thought, well, I'll have to investigate it. And I spoke to a few other MPs and said, look, have any of you had sub-postmasters with a blemishless record who've run the post office quite successfully for a long time and suddenly been accused of fraud? And mysteriously, some had. And there were 5 MPs, and we formed something called the Post Office Review Group. There was a chap, Labour MP from Morley and outwards, so that's 3 MPs ago, Mike Wood. There was myself. There was James Arbuthnot, who was an MP at the time. He's now in the House of Lords. There was Kevin Jones from Durham North, a Labour MP. And mysteriously, there was Oliver Letwin, who was Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office, so he ran the civil service, and he was David Cameron's chief political advisor, so he was advisor to the Prime Minister. And he'll come back into the story later. Now, many of you will have seen the ITV drama about the post office and what happened and the Horizon scandal. That came out, I think, in January 23. Everything that's in that programme, I said in the House of Commons between 2014 and 2015 on the Hansard record, and nobody wanted to listen to me. For at least 5 years, I went to all of the media outlets. I went to the BBC, ITV, Sky, Channel 4 News, the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express. I went to all of them and said, look, I've got the evidence now, because I'd managed to get a contact of mine called Ron Warmington of Second Sight, a team of forensic accountants. I got the post office, who Paula Venables had said the Horizon system is absolutely bomb-proof. It's Rolls-Royce, nothing wrong with it. So I said, well, in that case, you won't mind us putting forensic accountants in to check your perfect system. And they couldn't say no. I had an argument with the MPs, because I said, look, the Cabinet Office, Oliver Letwin, the Cabinet Office has got to pay for this, for it to be an independent investigation. And he insisted that the Post Office pay for their own investigation. And you can imagine what I said about that. I said the moment that Ron Warmington finds anything wrong, or his team, because they're paying him, they're going to shut the investigation down. I had that argument. I lost it with the MPs. They said the Post Office was going to pay for their own investigation. And within weeks of Ron being in there, exactly what I'd feared was going to happen is happening. The Post Office were redacting his reports before he could get them to the MPs. It was a cover-up of a cover-up of a cover-up. And in the end, Ron had to leak the unredacted reports to myself and James Arbuthnot. And then the Post Office went for his firm and tried to prosecute him for breach of contract. And the story that Michael Rudkin had told me in that first surgery, one of those very first surgeries, was that he'd been elected to be the representative for all the sub-postmasters in the UK. A real privilege. So he passed the day-to-day running of the post office over to his wife, Susan. And part of his duties, he'd been invited in 2008 down to Fujitsu's headquarters in Bracknell. He'd gone to the premises as the representative for all the sub-postmasters. They managed and the Horizon system. It was their computer system that the post office ran on. And he says he thinks that they mistook him for someone else. So they showed him around the building, he says, and then they took him down into what they called the boiler room in the basement. And he said, and there were loads of IT engineers working on terminals. And he looked at it and he saw it was the Horizon system they were working on. And he said, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we're sorting out all the glitches. And remote access to the terminals in the sub-postmasters' post offices, without their knowledge, they were correcting faults. And they were doing thousands a day, thousands and thousands of faults a day. And of course, human nature being what it is, if you're doing thousands and thousands of corrections every day, if someone presses a wrong key, someone's got a big problem. And they were never going to admit it because they shouldn't have been doing it anyway. So, when they found out who Mr. Rudkin really was, they said, they threw him out the building. Ushered him out the building, he got in his car, he went home to Ibstock from Bracknell, arrived home late, had dinner with his good lady. They went to bed, and before they were out of bed in the morning, there was a knock at the door of their post office in Ibstock. It was a post office accounts inspector, and he said, "You're £44,000 short on your computer overnight." That's one hell of a coincidence, isn't it? That the day that Mr. Rudkin had inadvertently uncovered what was going on with Horizon in 2008, his wife had got a shortfall on the computer, and they were prosecuted, they were discredited, and obviously Mr. Rudkin's evidence at the time was discounted. After Ron Warmington had gone in, we had a whistleblower from Fujitsu came forward and verified exactly, one of the engineers who was in the room when Michael Rudkin was there. And I'll bear in mind that when I first wrote to Fujitsu on behalf of Mr. Rudkin, Fujitsu said that Mr. Rudkin had never been on the premises. I told them that he'd signed the visitor's book on the day he visited the premises, and they came back and said that they'd lost the visitor's book for that day. But once I'd got that evidence from the Fujitsu whistleblower, I went to all the media outlets. No one would run the story. Many of you will have seen the ITV Post Office Horizon scandal video. I would like you to watch the real version of what happened at the post office, and it's made by me last year. It's called Storm on the Horizon.
The post office told every single one of us sat here today, told us over and over, you're the only one.
The ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, has rightly provoked a storm of outrage. And it's a storm that's long overdue.
Look at us. Here we all are.
I became aware of this injustice in 2010, shortly after I was elected.
None of us.
And I started making noise about it almost straight away.
Only one ever again.
For behind every actor's performance in this drama is a real person, a real family, a real constituent. Michael Rudkin and his wife Susan for many years ran the post office in the village of Ibstock, a village I know well, where two of my children went to nursery.
I'm going to show you how to do this.
And then right in front of my eyes, he starts changing the sub-postmasters' figures. Excuse me. I've been telling my members for years, no one else has access to their branch accounts.
Mr. Rudkin's visit to Fujitsu was a pivotal moment in both the drama and the real-life quest for the truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know what this means. It means they can sneak in behind your back, change your figures, bugger off, and leave with no trace.
Remote access. Well, that makes sense.
But it was also the moment that the Rudkins' lives really fell apart.
They said that was impossible. They said that the branch accounts were totally secure. That's what they told me.
They lied.
The version of events given here by Sean Dooley's Michael Rudkin describes exactly what happened to the real one in 2008.
So I drive home from Fujitsu. The next morning, I wake up and my wife is stood at the foot of our bed and there's an auditor beside her. Your post office is now £44,000 in deficit, says he. Coincidence?
Revenge?
My wife ran the post office when I was away on Federation business. So although I was the sub-postmaster, my poor wife is now a convicted criminal.
It was the start of a 4-year living nightmare for the Rudkins, particularly for Susan, who ran the post office day to day, and on whom suspicion and criminal charges fell.
I'm big enough and ugly enough to look after myself, and have done so but I also am very protective towards my wife at 5'2", 8 stone. Initially, when this first broke, contemplated suicide. Me and my 2 sons, we had to administer the medication prescribed by a general practitioner because she could potentially have carried out that threat of taking her life, because they absolutely destroyed Susan's character and personality. She was a fun-loving, active woman, outgoing, would think nothing of jumping on a push bike and joining in with the boys, kayaking, canoeing. She used to be a horse rider. Now, as things stand, yeah, the stature's still the same, but psychologically she's not the same person. To go through that court procedure, to almost pass out in the dock, to be then told she would have a 12-month suspended sentence for 2 years. She would have a 6-month electronic tag. She would have 300 hours of community service to do. And ironically, it was in a charity shop as a cash handler. And this is a woman who's accused of stealing money.
Michael and Susan Rudkin brought their story to one of the very first surgeries I ever held following my initial election victory in 2010. I could scarcely believe what they were saying, but believe it, I did. And they now feel that constituency surgery was at least the beginning of the end of their ordeal.
Susan and I was, over that 4-year period, were full of despair and despondency. We thought our world had fallen apart. I think Andrew himself initially was quite surprised, but I was equally surprised with the speed at which Andrew then came back to me for another surgery and said, would you attend? He'd made some preliminary investigative work and found that the complaint that I was making had some justification. Suddenly to get somebody in your local MP who understood how you were feeling, but more importantly believed in you. You weren't there as somebody that was representing untruths. He could see potentially that there was some truth in the arguments that we were putting forward. He investigated them. He came back promptly and said, there is a case to be answered and I'm here to support you.
To give some background to how the Post Office have let down both the sub-postmasters and indeed members of this House throughout this process.
And it wasn't until Andrew got up in Parliament and started to make an issue out of this, and the fact that then other MPs started to think, hang on a minute, I've just had one of my constituency members complain of something similar.
Postmasters attempted to balance their accounts at the end of the day. From that period forward, there have been failing...
And 550 of us went to court under a group litigation order, which only 1 or 2 of these is issued a year. So that gives some indication of the magnitude and the success that the pressure that our MPs, and in particular Andrew being at the forefront of this, brought about the changes that was necessary for this industry.
This has been the result of many years' work to achieve justice for over...
Before there was no future. People. Susan and I would have been dead and buried. We'd have been just another casualty, forced out of the industry, had our property confiscated. Having talked to Andrew, been to several of his surgeries, then there was a future. There was some prospects at the end of this. Because the confiscation order the Post Office had got in place then had to be lifted and removed so that we could get on with our lives, and we've retained the property.
For many, many months, Fujitsu claimed that Mr. Rudkin had never been on the premises. I told them that Mr. Rudkin claims he signed the visitors book on that day, and helpfully Fujitsu said that they'd lost the visitors book for the day in question. Eventually, a whistleblower came forward from Fujitsu, one of the IT engineers, and he verified everything that Michael Rudkin had said.
Ron Warmington was the forensic accountant I recommended to the government to investigate with a view to administering a mediation scheme for the victims. He says the relationship that he and I built was central to his work, and getting to the truth.
Andrew brought to the chamber of the House of Commons a business instinct which seemed to be lacking in so many others. He had that sort of awareness of human frailty and of wrongdoing that meant he and I were on the same wavelength. He understood what I was doing and I understood what he was asking.
The House should know that the Post Office has always maintained that it is not possible to alter accounts in a sub-post office remotely. However, recently...
What Michael was reporting was a pivotally important matter.
My member's been losing money.
Oh, the bottom line.
Me included.
Meet your friendly covert operations team.
I get in there.
It turned out to be hugely important. The whole business of Fujitsu meddling routinely, perhaps even on an industrial scale each night, altering branch accounts to correct errors that had come up through the system itself. Andrew got that, he understood that issue. He understood that when we said, of course, a company like Fujitsu is going to have a backdoor into the system, because systems, databases, do sometimes accumulate errors and they need to be corrected. Now, what we didn't know at that time, but Andrew was very, very quick on the uptake in understanding, was that not only was that likely to be happening, but it had been happening. What was worse was that, and this was completely outrageous, was that those alterations were being made without the knowledge or permission of the impacted sub-postmasters, and often using their IDs and passwords.
You're inside some sub-postmaster's horizon and he doesn't know. Said, yeah. Yeah, I am.
Now, Andrew had that sort of business acumen that he could get that straight away. And what was, in a sense, frustrating was that he would get it straight away, so would James, or for that matter, Mike would. Post Office, on the other hand, would look at me as though I'd dropped down from Klingon or something like that and was talking in some foreign language. They just didn't understand it and would come up with weasel-worded answers. So when I asked the question, has Post Office or any of its subcontractors, such as Fujitsu, ever altered any branch's account without the knowledge or permission of the impacted sub-postmaster? And that's verbatim the question, verbally and put in writing. And then the answer would come back, there is no functionality in the Horizon system to remotely access branch terminals. People like Andrew and I would go into orbit because they aren't corrected through the front-end system, in this case Horizon. They are corrected with very powerful software that goes right into the database. It's a weasel-worded answer that is probably true, in fact that is true, but it's so monstrously deceptive that it's actually a lie. Now, Andrew got that stuff, and God bless him for doing that. And he stuck with it. He didn't quit.
Post Office Limited then started proceedings against Mr. Rudkin's wife for theft
He
and false accounting. They also
not only
for a confiscation order
ferociously represented the Rudkins throughout, he saw the bigger picture, much bigger picture. There were many, many more people impacted, and he understood the consequences.
Why? Well, because the government...
My part has been written out of this drama. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. But what ITV have also written out is its own refusal to tell this story when the broadcaster was first told about it, by me, in 2014. Its chief executive at the time was Adam Crozier, who at the height of the scandal was in charge of Royal Mail, of which the Post Office was then part. ITV doesn't mention its old boss in the drama series either.
Paula, why don't you make those files available? What's the problem?
The only boss they talk about is Paula Venables, who replaced Crozier in 2010, after most of the Horizon damage had sadly already been done.
I wanted to get this out in the open. It was a government cover-up, and I wanted those innocent people to be vindicated. I went to the BBC, to ITV, to Sky, to Channel 4 News. I went to the Times, I went to the Telegraph, I went to the Daily Mail. I did actually get an article in the Sunday Express. Caroline Wheeler was the political editor of the Sunday Express at the time, and we did a small article about it, which is all we could get in, about this huge miscarriage of justice. Caroline subsequently moved to the Times, the Sunday Times, and I was expecting, we were all optimistic that now she was at a broadsheet newspaper, the newspaper of record, that we'd be able to expose this great injustice. But the fact is, when Caroline Wheeler went to the Sunday Times, her ability to get that story out disappeared with her move. What we're having is suppression of the media, of certain stories. Certainly for at least 5 years, I pressed the media to expose this injustice around the Horizon system, and every one of them refused to ever run the story. That might strike some chords with the current mainstream media's unwillingness to report on vaccine harms, vaccine deaths, or even the excess deaths, or the WHO treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations.
You have to wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, if this organisation, the Post Office, is even aware of the misery it has caused. The fact that the I've been on my feet in the chamber of the House of Commons for many years, talking about this toxic blend of corporate greed and governmental and regulatory bungling that led to the victimisation of thousands of innocent people. It only serves to show to me that this organisation is not fit to conduct an inquiry into this matter. No one seems to care. I fear history will not judge this House kindly. Worse still, in a country supposedly committed to free and frank exchange of views, it appears that no one cares that no one cares. Well, I care, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm still on my feet today in that chamber. Different issue, different government, different greedy corporations, but in my view, absolutely the same dynamic. More than 20 rejections to be allowed to raise this topic, but at last we're here to discuss the number of people dying.
The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, in Alan Bates, as in Andrew Bridgen, came together with other fellow MPs. Those are the good men that did something. I'm extremely disappointed in government in relation to where Andrew finds himself today. To have accusations levelled against you, and I know what that's all about, when you have these false allegations levelled against you that you're misrepresenting something, when in actual fact you're not misrepresenting, you're making comparisons in terms of numbers, then it's disgraceful and shameful that this particular government, the Conservative Party, have adopted that attitude. I try not to take a political stance because I have voted for both Labour and for Conservatives. But I also believe that sometimes we have to take the politics out of this and we have to say, can I trust that man to deliver for the local community? And as is the case with Andrew Bridgen, yes, I can trust him. And I will go on record as saying, yes, I would vote for him.
What we're seeing, even for the over 85-year-olds, according to the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities.
As to the situation with Andrew and the COVID situation and his being cast adrift by the Conservative Party and speaking to an all but empty House, I find it utterly disgraceful. Whether he's right or wrong, and I personally think he's right, but whether he's right or wrong, we, the populace, elect MPs to represent us and to debate properly, thoroughly, to the point of reaching the truth, matters of consequence. And if this is not a matter of consequence, I don't know what the hell is. The possibility, some would argue the probability, others would argue the proved certainty, that certain pharmaceutical businesses have inadequately tested stuff that we've got floating around in our bloodstream now, and that there have been excess deaths and there have been horrible health consequences for a lot of people, and that subjecting young tiny children who wouldn't have suffered adverse consequences from COVID at all, to having to be immunised or to receive jabs. Of course that should be questioned. Of course it should be debated properly by a full House. When we, the population, see the full House there to debate MPs' expenses and salaries, and 7 or 8 people to listen to Andrew, who's a highly articulate chap, I think it's utterly disgraceful. And 10 out of 10 for him, to Andrew, for sticking to his guns and, you know, what is clearly huge personal cost campaigning on this. I mean, I raise my hat to the man.
You know, we've waited so long for this day, and
It took well over a decade for ITV, the rest of the legacy media, and the government to get their act together on the subject of the sub-postmasters Horizon scandal.
I mean, look at us. Do we look like criminals?
What we know now about the Post Office Horizon scandal is that Tony Blair knew when he bought the Horizon system in the late 90s that it was full of glitches. It was actually designed by Fujitsu to deliver benefits through the post office. They were never able to sort the glitches out. They'd spent £800 million on it. That's a lot of money today. It's even more money in the 1990s. They didn't want to write off the investment, so they made it into a retail package and gave it to the post office. What I also know is that the Fujitsu told the post office it was a Rolls-Royce system. The post office put Fujitsu on a £20 a failed transaction penalty clause. They were having thousands every day. They didn't want to pay the post office £40,000 a day in compensation. You can only imagine how many millions of transactions were going through that system. So they employed the engineers to correct the system, which is far cheaper for them. They should never have been doing that. They maintained in court that no one could ever alter the sub-postmasters' accounts remotely without their knowledge. That meant that every single one of those convictions was unsafe. I've tried to give evidence to the Post Office Horizon public inquiry, which I got Boris Johnson to agree to. I've written to them every 6 months for 3 years, and every 6 months they write back to me and say, you'll be giving your evidence before Christmas, but they never said which Christmas. They're now winding up the inquiry, and I will never give evidence to that inquiry, because the evidence I will give that my constituent, Michael Rudkin, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't a mistake in the system. Someone deliberately targeted Mrs. Rudkin the same day that Michael uncovered what was going on at Fujitsu to discredit them. That's no coincidence, and they don't want to hear that. And if you remember, we had Oliver Letwin in the group of MPs paying a lot of attention to what was going on. That was because the government wanted to sell off the post office and they didn't want any problems. And that's why it was covered up for so long. And the collateral damage was 1,000 people got criminal convictions, some went to prison, many lost their houses, there were divorces, there were suicides, there were people's reputations trashed. And there would have been also many, many thousands of people who would have paid back money and not prosecuted who were running post offices. I actually had another constituent came to me some years ago. He moved in from the Forest of Dean, so he would have been Mark Harper's MP, constituent. And he came to me and said he wanted a surgery. He said, I want to talk to you about the Horizon system. You won't know anything about it. I said, well, I might know a bit more than you think. And his story was that he'd run a post office for 18 months. Every month he was having small shortfalls, £100, £200, £300, £400. He was having to make it up with his own money. And in the end he turned around to the post office and he said, I don't want to play this game anymore. Can you please get someone to take over this post office? I can't make any money out of it because all my wages is going back into the till to make up the shortfalls. And they did. And he said that on the day they got somebody else in and they came in with the auditors and they balanced all the books off, he said, I even gave them £70 out of my wallet to balance the books up on the last day. And we signed and said, that's it, we're done. And he came to my constituency, and again, he was a broken person, and he said his mother was very old, she was very frail, and he decided he was just going to be his mother's carer, and his only income was his carer's allowance. And he said 6 months after they'd signed that it had all balanced off, the post office came back to him and said they'd found another error, and he owed them £1,500, and they took it from his carer's allowance. So it was a cover-up of both parties. Tony Blair knew all the glitches that were in that system. The people at the top of his government knew of the glitches, and they had sat back for 20 years and watched innocent people go to prison when they could have said something. And the same was perpetrated under the Conservative government. And they'll say now, oh, we're putting all this legislation through to fast-track the overturning all the convictions of these sub-postmasters because the judiciary aren't doing it fast enough. I think they'd only done 84, and he said that you can't claim compensation until you've had your criminal conviction overturned, and we want to give them compensation. That's not true, because I got Susan Rudkin's conviction overturned in December 2020, and I saw Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin only a few weeks ago. They still haven't had their compensation. Thank you very much for listening to me.